Hey there. Thanks for tuning in. You ready for another episode of my Bigfoot sighting? Alright then, let's do this.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, loves in the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.
My Bigfoot sighting happened in Harlan, Kentucky. It was right around January the 20th, not long before, in September the 30th, 2019, I had lost my wife. She was just 38 years old, and I needed some time alone in the woods. So I decided just to gather my thoughts and just get away from everything and everyone had been going on. I went up onto some property of a family member. I didn't look for anything that day. Being a former researcher, usually I observe what's going on around me. But that day I was just wanting to get away. My mind was racing. Everything from losing my wife to what am I going to do? It all piled up on me and I couldn't take it no more. So I gathered my backpack, my walking stick, which I take with me everywhere, and decided to hit the woods. I came up onto the property, which was normal for us. Family members had game cameras and things like that, strode about the property. I just so happened to notice that on the ground there was some feed corn, and we like to feed the wildlife in the area sometimes just so we could get pictures and things like that. We have a very, very abundant amount of black bear that comes through the area where I have my sighting at. So the ground is very, very rocky and terrainy, thick with vegetation. I mean, we have some of the most beautiful mountains in the area where I live at. I love living here, don't get me wrong, but the day that I had my Bigfoot sighting, I was put off from doing research, which I had spent the last 10 years of doing. And I'm talking about boots on the ground, climbing through briars, getting chiggers. And if a lot of you don't know what chiggers are, they're a flower that has this white bloom on it that these little mites like to get in, and they get on your skin, and they're kind of like flea bites. They'll itch you to death. So I'm thinking, what am I going to do as I'm walking up the mountainside? I get halfway up to the top, and I notice where the corn was laying on the ground. And the first thing that went through my mind, there's turkey. So I tried to be as quiet as I could as I went up on the hill. And there's a saddle where I guess it was a gully that used to be at where a lot of the rainfall would come off the mountain. So I decided, well, I've been here plenty of times. I had my little binoculars with me. I wanted to make sure that I could see good. So I decided I was going to set my backpack down. Along with my walking stick, I laid onto my backpack. I just stood up to get a good look around everything to see if I could spot where they had a deer stand at on the other side of the ridge. I didn't have any intention of looking for anything that day, like I just stated. I heard a popping noise, and no sooner than I heard the popping noise, I just so happened to look over the bank from me, and in a little flattened area, I noticed there was something there. And the first thought that goes through my mind is, it's just a bear. We have prevalent population of black bear in the area. A friend of mine had mentioned one time she'd seen what we call a cinnamon bear. It's a black bear basically that lacks pigment in its color follicle of its hair and makes it look like a cinnamon color, a reddish brown looking color. I thought to myself, well, I'm just going to grab my stuff and slowly go back down the mountainside The year before, I'd actually been run off by a mama bear and a couple cubs, and I really didn't think much of it. Man, was she mad at me. She was really mad. She was chomping her teeth together. She was huffing at me. And I didn't want that to happen again because it actually scared me. I didn't have anything on me that day, and no knife, no gun, nothing. As I'm standing there and I'm trying to think, what am I going to do? I didn't bring anything with me except for my cell phone in my pocket. And by then I totally forgot I had it on me. I must have bumped the walking stick because I heard a pop around my feet where I was standing at. And when that happened, the bear stood up. I'll never forget what was running through my mind when I seen this bear. The average size bear in our county, in this part of southeastern Kentucky where I live at, the tallest one that I've ever seen is probably right around 6 foot, 300 to 400 pounds. This wasn't no bear. This thing was huge. It took me a couple seconds to gather my bearings to what I was seeing. It was reddish brown in color. I'm going to say at least close to 8 foot tall. But there was something funny that I noticed about this Bigfoot. It kind of looked emaciated. It had broad shoulders, but the legs were real skinny. The hair was really thick on the shoulders, the head area, all the way down to the knee. And then I noticed the calf muscles. I could actually see this thing's calf muscles, which were huge. I don't know what to do. I don't know whether to grab my stuff, move. I didn't want this thing to turn around and come towards me. I'd been told by a couple friends of mine for years in the Bigfoot community that if I kept looking, one day I was going to run into something. And I always shrugged it off, and I was just like, no, I'll probably go the rest of my life and never experience anything. I've heard tree knocks and I've heard howls, but never in this area where I was at. It was in other parts of the county, and I'd actually been with a couple of family members. It got quiet, real quiet, and I noticed there wasn't a bird. And when I first started up the hill, you could hear the crows going crazy, but I didn't pay no attention to it. I just kept on. Like I said, I just buried my wife a couple months before that, and I was having a real hard time. I was grieving real bad. So this thing is there in front of me. And like I said, I must have hit that backpack or something one more time with my foot because I kind of zoned out. I didn't know what to think. When I did this, it turned, but it was kind of crazy the way it turned. It was more or less, it turned at the hip, and that kind of snapped me back into what was going on. The first thought that went through my mind then was, what is this? Is this what I think it is? But when it turned, it didn't turn its head or its shoulders completely around. It just it was kind of like a curious dog cocking its head sideways. But I did notice something about it. It had an ear, a small ear, but the earlobe was really fat. Kind of put me in mind of the statue of kind of like Buddha, but the ear around the top, the cartilage of the ear itself was kind of small, like mine. I've got small ears myself. And I didn't get to see the face. And I was thinking to myself, turn around, but it didn't. In one swift move, this thing bolted away from me. It ran down through the gully and out of my sight, which is quite a good distance away from me, 300 feet. And then there's a small creek, which is not hard to jump at all. And then up the hillside. Halfway up the hillside, I'm going to say at least 200 yards, there wasn't any trees. A logging company had to come through some years back and cleared out a big section. So I was able to see him up to the tree line. I thought to myself, well, it's time to get out of here. Grab your stuff and leave. I kind of went foggy. I didn't know what to think. I was just like froze Finally, I just grabbed my backpack and my walking stick and got off the hillside as fast as I could. I got down into the yard of my family member's place, scratching my head, thinking, just like a million things going through my mind, even worse, and almost to the point to where I had a panic attack. I get home, I finally put the car in park, and I thought to myself, holy crap, I think I seen a Bigfoot. But then the thought came to my head, did I really see what I saw? No, I didn't see it. It was a bear. But then I thought again, it was too tall to be a bear. You seen the calf muscles on this thing. They were huge, defined. And I noticed the weird thing about it too, when I seen the calf muscles, they were kind of like a grayish looking color, skin tone. But I didn't notice that on the ear. The ears were kind of pale. It shook me up. It made me think a lot about, what am I doing? Do I really want to run up on something that's bigger than this one? I've done podcasts before with some of my friends that are in the community. I have a really good close friend that lives not far from me at all that actually got me into doing cryptid research. Not long after that, I quit altogether. I'm not easy to be scared. Not at all. I used to be a paranormal researcher. I've seen some crazy things. But this right here, this almost gave me a constant panic attack. I started going back to church. Not long after that, I met my second wife. But I still think to this day, was it a Bigfoot that I saw? Even though my friends in the community keep telling me, yeah, you've had a classic Bigfoot sighting. But I didn't get to see the face, you know. If I just got to see the face, that would be in the 100% dead on sighting that I've been looking for years. I don't know. Still to this day, I have so many questions. Like I've said before, you know, I've heard tree knocks. I even thought maybe a couple times I'd have something thrown at me before. But it wasn't nothing like this. This day really, really kind of emotionally drained me that day. I finally sat down, and the first person I called was my good friend Thomas Markham. I told him, Thomas runs a website where he puts up articles. He's a book author, a great researcher. Anytime I had a question, cryptid related or UFO related, and then not long after I had this, Thomas was getting into the paranormal also. I told him about what I'd seen. He told me, he said, Jim, it sounds like to me you saw Bigfoot. You've seen a Sasquatch. But I keep scratching my head, and it's something that it drives me crazy sometimes to think about. Was it a Bigfoot I seen that day? Or was it just somebody in a suit? No, it couldn't have been somebody in a suit. There's nobody crazy enough to wander around in these woods in a suit. Harlan County is a big hunter community. We have big populations of bear. We have big populations of deer. We even have elk in this area. Some people think they've seen mountain lions or black panthers, as we call them in this area, even though our Kentucky Fish and Wildlife won't acknowledge that they're in this area. I've seen quite a bit of trail cameras with pics with these big cats, as they call them. A lot of people will just, oh, that's just somebody's house cat. When you've got folks that come forward and say, no, I went back and measured. A couple months had went by after I'd had this encounter. I stayed out of the woods, but it still ate at me. I need to get back up into that area and see what this thing was doing. Why was it hunkered down to begin with? So I finally got up enough gumption to go up and see what was going on. Of course, this time I took a knife with me. If this thing was going to jump on me, it's going to kill me, but I'm going to hurt it. This is the first thing that goes through my mind. So I gather my stuff, my backpack, my walking stick again, and I go back up there. This time I'm super attentive about what's going on around me. Every little twitch, every sound a bird chirp, a crow call. I was zoned in on it. I get up to the area where I'd set my backpack down and my walking stick first when I had the sighting. I thought to myself, well, I'm just going to pick my walking stick back up and I'm just going to go down this little embankment and I'm going to see what's going on down here in this area. I've been taught by my friend Thomas to carry plaster around and water, a plastic bag to mix it in, and a little wooden popsicle stick to mix everything up with so I could get cast. I had my hopes built up just to get a perfect cast of this thing that I'd seen that day. But as I come walking up onto the area, the exact area where I'd seen it, I noticed something funny right off the bat. There was this rock that was laying on the ground, and it was funny. We have a lot of acorns that grow in our area. The deer love acorns. Any hunter can tell you that. But on this rock, I also noticed that there was pieces of another rock that was laying on top of it. There was acorn shells that was scattered. And this thing was taking a rock and was beating these shells open. What type of creature would do that? A bear is not going to do that. They don't have opposable thumbs. They can't hold on to a rock. Would they even be smart enough to break open a nutshell to get what's inside of it? But this thing did. This thing was literally taking a rock and beating these nuts, these acorns, wide open. I've got a shell that I kept that kind of looks like it has some teeth marks in it. I thought about trying to find someone that could check it out, but I don't know if I want to get back into all that again. I just got back like brave again just to start doing podcasts. When I first started out doing podcasts, during the research time, I was delving into Bigfoot. I was obsessed with it. My first wife at the time had actually said, I think you're becoming obsessed over Bigfoot. But I wanted to just watch every film I could get my hands on, read every book I could get my hands on. I wanted to be very knowledgeable on the subject. I don't like it when people call themselves experts when it comes to the field, because there's no expert. A lot of my friends, close friends that I still have in the community, think the same way. There's no such thing as an expert when it comes to the field of cryptozoology. You can be knowledgeable about the subject, but there's no experts. Because if there were experts, everyone would know everything there is to it. During the time that I was doing research, a good friend of mine had pictures that he had taken. I think he said it was maybe a family member of his. I'm not for sure. But there was a pond, a good-sized pond on the property. He said he'd been up there scouting for deer one year. He wasn't looking for anything but deer prints. He noticed as he came around the top of the pond, 3 days before that it had been raining. So he's walking through all this mud and stuff, and he stops and he noticed that that's not a deer print. That's most definitely not a deer print is what he told me. And I mean, when he said this, his eyes were wide. And this is a good friend of mine who's never lied to me, who's always been straightforward. He said this was footprints, Jim. And he said there was one whole one in the middle of this mud, and then there was a partial one of the toes. And I kind of looked at him a little funny. I said, what do you mean a partial one? He said, well, there was a rock at the edge. He said, so evidently this thing had stepped heel on this rock. He said, but this was a good print. I said, okay. I said, man, I wish I'd been there to see this. He says, well, I can do you a good favor. He says, check this out. He reaches in his pocket and he grabs his cell phone out. He had taken pictures. This footprint was a good inch deep. It comes from the water, and that's it. No seeing if this thing and which way it had came in. It was kind of weird. It was like it had walked out of the water. I asked him, I said, did you go around the back side of the pond to see if it had come from the area behind you and walk through? he said, well, common sense hit me. And he said, yeah, I went and looked, but there was no prints to be found on that side. Just like in the area where I'd went back up to look for footprints that day, there was a lot of pine needles. We have a lot of foliage in our area that falls every fall, and it's just like dumping buckets and buckets on top. I dug down through the pine needles, through the bits of tree, a good 7 inches before I hit the ground. And in our area, the ground is really, really hard on the mountainsides. I mean, we're right on the Appalachian Trail that goes from Georgia all the way up the East Coast, up into England, New Hampshire. So I didn't get a print. I was really let down. And my friend, he said he didn't get anything that day showing which direction it came except for the muddy spot where he got the print in half. Like I said, this whole subject has mesmerized me and made me study on it. Everything I can get. I've seen everything from the Freeman footage, Patterson-Gimlin footage, and studied them extensively. I always try not to brush off other people's sightings, no matter how crazy they may sound. But this is the way I look at it. I wasn't there the day they had their sighting. I didn't see what they saw. I didn't hear or feel what they were feeling. And it's just like with me. Nobody was there with me that day. It was me and me only. So whether folks want to believe me, that's fine. You know, I could care less. I'm a Christian man. I have faith in God, and I'm not going to lie to jeopardize my faith or my soul. So you can take it the way you want to take it, but I saw what I saw, and I experienced it. No one else. And since I've started doing podcasts again, I've come to the conclusion that that's all I'm doing. I'm not doing no more boots on the ground research, but I do have a lot of questions. And some of my friends are like, is it religious reasons why you are not doing cryptid research anymore or looking into Bigfoot? Yeah, I'm not going to lie. It's part of it. But how would you fight back with something that is almost 8 foot tall and almost 2 times your shoulder width? You're not going to put up much of a fight. So you can take this as a warning from me. Be careful when you're out there and you're looking for these things. And I say things because to me they are things. We don't know much about them. We don't know if there's some Gigantopithecus extinct giant orangutan that had been around some millions of years ago. We don't know if there's some military experiment gone bad, but the feeling that I got that day, and it scared me. I'm 6 foot tall. I'm 330 pounds. I'm a former professional wrestler on the independent circuit. I've fought in cage fights before, but this experience, it kind of left a scar, I guess you could say, on me, on my mind. I don't think it's PTSD, but I have interviewed people before that experienced PTSD. I've interviewed hunters that don't go back in the woods anymore, but there's a good reason why. So you might think to yourself, well, I probably won't ever experience anything like that. Well, as my grandmother would tell me, this good old country boy will tell you too, don't count your chickens before they hatch. I wasn't looking for this thing that day. I was just out in the woods to clear my mind. So just be careful and please take my warning. There could be bigger creatures out there. We don't know enough about these things. There's a lot of folks in the community that get upset with other groups because they carry a gun or carry a knife and they say, oh, these creatures are not going to hurt you. They're our woodland friends. No, better safe than sorry is how the saying goes. So please, if you go out into the woods, make sure you're with at least someone else, and I'll pray for your safety.
My Bigfoot sightings were 19 years apart. The first one occurred in November of 1991. I was 15 years old. I had gone on a hunting trip with my dad. We had crossed the Wabash into southern Illinois. There was a piece of Indiana on that side, so technically it happened in Indiana. He dropped me off. It was well before sunup. I grabbed my gear and started trekking back to the woods. It was probably a good 3/4 of a mile back there, following my reflector tacks back to my stand. And I had gotten up there and got at my tree, got secured, and just kind of watched and listened. And eventually I started dozing off. I don't know how long I was in that state. I know when I kind of woke up, it wasn't full light out, but it wasn't full dark. It was somewhere in between the magic hour, I guess what you call it. And I'd been woken up. I think there was about, 10, 15 deer just came stampeding underneath my tree stand. I'm watching this and I could see shadows and figures, like not super detailed, but you could still make out what they were. And I just kind of figured it was a big buck following them because it was the rut season. That's how it went. And I waited and waited, and it wasn't too much longer. And a humanoid figure had walked underneath me, but this was a very large person, if it was a person at all. Matted black hair, as far as I could tell. I'd say about 7, 8 feet tall from where I was sitting because I was still above it. But I know when it looked up at me, we weren't that far apart. And I couldn't see any eye shine, but I could kind of see the glint of the blue light coming from the sky from where I was at. It just kind of looked up at me and didn't really pause, just kind of kept on walking. Didn't really make a whole lot of noise and went on down where the deer went, and I didn't see it again. I haven't been back to those woods in almost 30 years now, but that was my first one. So about 19 years later, I'm living in Spencer County, Indiana. It's 3 or 4 counties upstate, still southern Indiana, and I was actually serving as a city police officer in a nearby town. One of my best friends was going through some life events that weren't very positive, and I decided to move in with him so I could help pay the bills and we could take care of each other and help each other out with this stuff. And where they live, it's right on the county line of Warwick County. There's a little Pigeon Creek runs right through there, and there's bottomlands and stuff like that. There's a bunch of acreage, at least 200 acres in the area, pretty secluded. And I'd been staying there about 3 weeks, and I'd visit this property very frequently before everything had happened, before I moved in. He had got called out of town for business, and that was no big deal. I had been working the night shift, 11 to 8 in the morning, so I was accustomed to staying up late. So I decided to start unpacking and things like that, and just kind of getting settled in, ready to go. And I'm doing these things, and like I just start feeling like I'm being watched. Just something's not right. It was just kind of creeping me out. I remember, and I never do this, I wouldn't actually grab my sidearm and put it in the holster and ward around the house. I didn't do those kind of things when I was off duty. I just get tired of wearing the gun and the boots, but that's how uncomfortable I was feeling. And I would hope this would get better, but it didn't. It just kept getting worse. It feels like for hours. At one point, I went and retrieved my 12 gauge and set it by the door. So I settled down for the night, started watching TV, and then bam, this rock bounces off my front window. And I jumped out of my skin. It scared me real good. And I got up and I went and grabbed my shotgun, and I was mad. I was more mad than I was scared at that point. But we'd had people down in the bottoms cooking up meth and trespassers and stuff like that I had run off before. I figured it's just them messing with me, which I don't know why. I was a police officer and they knew I was armed, but you never know what goes through people's heads. So I turned on the outside light and I stepped out on this porch. And it's about 3 feet off the ground, and I'm only about 5'8". And I'm scanning. I've got that shotgun cradled in my arms, across my chest, just looking. And I look across the yard. There's kind of a trail that runs down the lakes and the creek. And on the side of that, it looks like a giant black boulder. Just something like, where'd this big rock come from? And then it stood up, and it was huge. It was, like I said, I'm about, with my height, it's about 9 feet. And from that 50, 60 yards, as far as I can tell, me and this big guy, are looking at each other eye to eye. He was huge, jet black. I couldn't see a whole lot of detail just because of the darkness. I mean, it wasn't a full moonless light, and he just looked at me and I looked at him, and it seemed like it took forever. Like we were, like hours went by staring at each other. I know it was just a few seconds. And he just kind of looked at me, and I still had that shotgun crate on my arm. I didn't even think about the weapon in my hand. He just kind of let out this really large, loud grunt, like, and snorted at me, and turned around and walked back in the woods. And he let me know he was leaving. I mean, I could hear him crashing through the underbrush, purposely, I feel, making noise. So I stood there for a few minutes later, just, okay. Went back in the house, locked the door. Regardless to say, I didn't get much sleep that night. So the sun finally came up, and I found my courage and decided I was going to go have some breakfast and go pick a few things up at the store. And I took off. And one of the county deputies that I worked with, he's actually my night shift partner, even though we worked different departments, we helped each other out a lot. And I saw him parked at a gas station. I was a little bit late for him to be getting off work, but I pulled in and stopped just to see what was going on, shoot the breeze, say hello. And I'm asking about his nightings, man. I've been up in your neck of the woods all evening chasing after some prowler. Kept getting calls. He's like, "You see anything?" This officer and I had been through some things, so we trusted each other, And I told him what I'd seen, and I waited. I was like, "Yeah, I'm never going to hear the end of this one." And no, he didn't laugh. He's like, "Oh, it's him again." I'm like, "Him? Who you talking about?" He's like, "Well, every now and again, what you just described to me, this Bigfoot, he comes out around that neighborhood, that area, and gets into trouble, steals chickens and gardens, like to tap on houses and stuff. He's never hurt anybody or threatened anybody as far as I know, but we've still had to chase him around." And he specifically asked me, he's like, "Did you shoot at him?" I was like, No, I didn't feel threatened by him at all. It just kind of tripped me out. And he's like, "Yeah," he told me about it, and we sat there and discussed it for a little while, and then after that, we really didn't speak of it again. With our careers, that people think you're nuts, they're going to take your badge and gun away real quick. Now, other encounters I've had are not as exciting as that one. On that same property, about 2 or 3 years ago, I think it was September. My girlfriend and one of my good friends were down there in the woods collecting stuff for the YouTube channel. Like, we kind of do survival stuff like that, and best ways to build a fire from scratch, and etc. And the woods this happened in had been logged shortly after that experience I had. So there's a lot of new growth, and it's very thick through there. We were down this little ravine messing around, collecting stuff, and I watched a walnut bust through the foliage and smack me right in the shoulder. It hurt. I had a gun at the time. I had my Glock on my side, and I racked around, and whenever I pointed it, like, "What's going on?" Something took off. I don't know if it was a person or a squatch. I'm not sure. That was that one. And then later on, last year, November, my buddy and I decided to take a camping trip on the property as well. And we'd set our camp up on the ridge and sitting there minding our own business, sitting around a campfire, just BSing. And I heard a wood knock. It was east of where we were sitting. And listen, didn't hear any noise or anything like that, just a very distinct wood knock off the distance. So we waited about another hour or so. From the west, we hear another wood knock. As soon as we heard that wood knock, the coyotes from the east just went nuts, just howling. And then something ran down around that ravine. I don't believe it was a squatch. I think it was a deer that was spooked. But that was that one. I don't know if that was or what it was or wasn't, but about a year or two later, I ended up leaving my old department for another one, next county over. And this town was right along I-64, not too far for the southern part of Hoosier National Forest. Starts out down in Perry County in that area that goes all the way up into central Indiana. The next county over also didn't have a whole lot of law enforcement. I believe their county office would actually shut down at 11 or 12 o'clock at night. A lot of times we'd go out and assist ISP or just take it upon ourselves. A lot of times we would go out of our area of responsibility and to assist motorists, change tires, give them a ride back town, call them a tow truck. And on more than a few occasions, people had been out there for a while and were pretty sketched out by everything, like felt like they were being watched. I'd been told that a few times. And it kind of got creepy. I kind of got that feeling too. And we'd have a lot of hitchhikers come through town in that area. You know, Louisville's not too far from where I was at, and I-64 run you all the way to St. Louis. So we had a bunch of hitchhikers. It was later one night, and I had been on an assist detail and turned around and came back, and there was a young man walking down the highway. He was in the middle of the median, like over on the side of this 4-lane. And when I got pulled over, he came running, like practically jumped in my car. I was like, oh, easy, easy. And the guy was just freaked out. I mean, he was scared, nervous. I'm asking him questions like, is this guy up to something? Because it kind of made me feel a little uncomfortable. And I was talking to him about it. And he had said for the past hour while he was walking this way, he had seen and felt like something was following and keeping pace with him in the woods. And he would see this dark figure dart between trees when the headlights and the oncoming traffic. He was terrified. So I ended up taking him and getting him a hotel room for the night, and he let up the next day when it was daylight through that part of the woods. There was one night I got called out there to assist ISP. They'd pulled over a vehicle. Guy had drugs, felony warrant out of Texas. We got him in cuffs, and he kind of got a little rambunctious. So I told the trooper, just go ahead and go. I'll sit here and wait for the tow truck, which is standard procedure. And the tow truck was pretty good ways out. I sat up there for about 45 minutes. I didn't see or hear anything, but I was starting to get really creeped out. And at that point in my life, I was a pretty tough cop. Like, not much bothered me. I'd seen a lot of stuff. I got so sketched out there that I ended up grabbing my AR-15, which I'd never used, and like kind of put it in the seat beside myself. I was never so happy to see a tow truck. And he picked it up and took off, and I didn't go out there anymore unless I absolutely had to. And it was just kind of weird experiences. More than that, several people telling me these things, like we feel like something's following us or watching us, and it was just kind of almost all the time. Anytime I dealt with someone, especially after nightfall. Now, I've got a story about a Dogman. On my channel, there's the Dogtown Dogman. It was a story that was recounted to me back in the mid-'90s. I was a young man then. And at the time, I didn't know what a Dogman was or anything like that. But a year or two after that story, the girl I was dating came and picked me up, and we used to go down there and hang out in Dogtown. It's river camps and fields and not a whole lot down there. Just an excuse to get out of town. And we had parked, and the road is called Seminary Road. And the part that we were at goes between two fields. Fields are cut. And we parked, and there's an old oak tree that's been there forever. And we were about 200 yards from it. We got out. Well, we got into an argument. She got mad at me. So I'm sitting here on her car, and she stomps off down the road, at least 10, 15 minutes. And I'm just sitting there like, oh, great. She's going to leave me out here by myself. She had the keys. And then I just hear footballs, like gravel. She wore these little cowboy boots, and I could hear them clicking and clacking, and she was throwing rocks all over. And she gets back in the sight, and I mean, it's fairly well lit night. It's not a full moon, but pretty close. But I could see on her face just fear and terror. And I mean, she's pale white, it's shaking. I can see her eyes are watering, like she's very, very scared. Now I'm like, what's going on? She tells me to get my, use your imagination. She never used words like that. And we got in the car, and she did a burnout in reverse. Luckily, we didn't get caught in the field, and we were fishtailing through there. And she didn't drive like that. Finally got her home and got her calmed down enough. She told me that behind that tree, there was something there. It was big and black and had pointy ears. She described it to me as the comic book character Venom, but with the pointy ears. I didn't see anything like that, but I have no reason to doubt what she saw. It was just in her reactions and everything like that. And so there was that one. Now, from where this takes place, there's a lot of houses and stuff once you get further away from the river. And a friend of mine that I've had worked with for years, we had never had any conversations about cryptids or anything supernatural or odd like that. And we got on the subject about it. And I asked her if she knew what a Dogman was. And she's like, oh, yeah, I've had one walk in front of the car twice. Like, really? She's like, yeah, me and my mom. One of the encounters was not too far from the story I just told you about down in Dogtown. They were just driving, and this dogman walked out in front of him. He was older. They said what hair he had was pretty much gray, and looked like he was balding. Like, you could see skin or whatever. And he just kind of walked in front of the car and just kept going. Got up the street and across the street, went up in the woods. And then the second one that they told me about, I actually went out there. It's way further on the north end of our town, like still out in the county, but like way out there. And her mother had the same thing happen there, where another one, it wasn't the same one. She said it was younger and had full hair, and had walked right out in front of the car too and just kept going. Those are the dogman stories I have from down here. Kind of, I don't know what kind of encounters, secondhand or what people have told me. But the next county up is Warwick County. A buddy of mine, he's my watching partner now, had called me up, and we did a cast of a footprint we found back there in the city park. And it wasn't anything spectacular in size. I mean, it was only about, I think it was 11 inches long and then 4 feet wide at the ball of the foot. But what was weird about it was very deep, and I weigh about 250 pounds, and I stomped next to it with my bare foot and could not get any traction in it. This was also in March, and the daytime was warm. It wasn't bad. But at night, it was still frosty and getting cold, and where this print was taken from was in a very barbed area. We found a couple tracks, but this was the best one, but there was a lot of brambles and not a place a person would want to walk, especially barefooted in the cold. We got a cast from there and found a couple structures in the area. My partner, Brandon, actually invited me to go with him, but I had to work the other day. So him and his son were down there messing around after dark. And there's a little creek that runs right kind of to the side of it. It's almost like a border. And they had went to cross it. And he says a baseball-sized stone got thrown at them. So they took it as a warning, went ahead and got across to the other side and didn't mess around over there. But it might be a little Sasquatch, young Sasquatch living in that area, and that's very close to a town. We're planning on go ahead and start taking gifts up there, and then over the next few weeks, I'm hopefully going to get a set of 4 camera traps and see if we can find out what we can see what's going on up there. Those are my Sasquatch experiences.
Well, that's it for tonight's show. If you've had a Bigfoot sighting and would like to be a guest, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let us know. Thanks for listening. Have a great night.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, loves and the plow, and the 5-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. The sound of a memory brings me back to the bluegrass playing on my dad's 8-track. His pickup man had been through it, getting through the day on Scruggs and Skags, bucking hay bales to those Tennessee jams. There's no other way that I'd do it. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. Somebody call it backwards and double time, getting to the soul and the tremolo Kentucky style. Those are the anthems drumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Pace of the city life drives me wild. The only tune is the cars rushing by, with the bass on the stereos booming. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. Somebody call it backwards and double time, getting to the soul and the tremolo Kentucky style. Those are the anthems drumming out. my old Kentucky style. Those are the anthems drumming out country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down home, rhythm ride, chicken porch swing, mama's best sweet tea, kind of sound.